Well, hello and welcome back. Today is February the 3rd, 2020, and it is a very snowy day here in the good state of Utah. And as a result of that, we had a little bit of a slower bill day up on the hill, but nonetheless, still quite a bit to cover. So, the first thing I wanted to get into is I've had a lot of responses relates to all of these appropriations and just exactly how does that come about, especially with a part-time legislature. How is it that they're able to stay up on the budget and consider the budget and be aware of the needs? Well, today we're going to try to cover that. And so the question is, who is really running the show when it comes to the appropriations in the state of Utah? Any guesses? Well, you would be right if you were to say that it is the Office of Legislative Fiscal Analyst. And what this is it is basically a group of about 22 individuals that have been appointed, not elected, but appointed by the legislator and to assist in the legislative process. So these are accountants, these are citizens, much like you and I, who have a full-time job, and that full-time job is to assist the legislature. In fact, code requires them that within 30 days, prior to the governor listing out and enumerating his budget for the upcoming year, that they're the ones who are going to take the governor's proposed budget, sort it out, and they're going to come up with some specific funding that they recommend. Now, why is this important? Well, I have been spending countless hours up on the Legislative Hill during this session. Today is day 6. And every single meeting that is hosted in the morning for anywhere from 2 to 3 hours is all about appropriations. And while you are there, it becomes very evident that the individual who's running the show is this analyst that's been appointed to a specific committee. So they're the ones who come up with where does the money go and how are we going to introduce it and where could we cut and where do we stay the same. And most of that is being done upon the recommendations of guess who? The heads of every one of these state-run organizations. They're the ones who are showing up. They're the ones who are saying specifically, yes, I agree or I disagree with this particular funding. From there, the legislators more or less just kind of observe what's going on. In fact, many of them are busy getting drinks. Many of them are busy standing up and stretching their legs, and they'll periodically stand up and leave, which is evident because if you look at their voting, you'll find that people are there, but they may not be voting for every single vote that comes up as part of that committee. The reason for that? They're leaving. Beyond that, it's apparent to me that a lot of the legislators are just as in the dark as anybody. So they do their best to try to release information 2-3 days in advance, but unless you have the time to read it and review it, you're showing up basically blind and asking very, should we say, just rudimentary or basic questions about the proposal. The other reason why I say that it is these analysts who are running the show is I have yet to see any vote of opposition. 10 times out of 10, ladies and gentlemen, when a funding issue is brought up, everybody votes in the affirmative. No one votes against. Now, there are some legislators that may say, hey, I have a question about this, but very quickly they'll meet with office staff. And after meeting with office staff, they'll have that cleared up and they vote it right through. So I've put some links down below where you can go to their site. You can try to figure out who these people are. You can contact these individuals. But again, who's running the show? The other thing I wanted to focus on today is some focused legislation, and that's on weapons, also known as Second Amendment legislation. So I've put a link down below. Click on that link and then scroll to the bottom, and you can go through a variety of different categories and subcategories. Today we're focusing on weapons. There are a number of bills that are proposed, but let's look at just 2 of those bills. The first one is HB 109, and this is being run by a Democrat, Brian King, and he's introducing universal background checks. Now, on the surface, this looks like a way where we can make absolutely certain that criminals no longer have weapons. None of us like the mass shootings. None of us like children being assaulted or killed at their school. So I think all of us want to come up with a system or a way where we can make sure that criminals do not get weapons in their hands. And the universal background check is this idea that if we prohibit the private sales of any firearm or dangerous weapon without a background check, that will make sure that criminals no longer have guns. Newsflash, that does not work. Criminals are criminals for a reason, ladies and gentlemen, and they break laws. So by putting more laws in effect, how does that make sense that in some way we're going to make sure that these criminals no longer break the law? Second of all, look at all of the mass shootings. The majority of these mass shootings, the person is receiving a firearm legally. They're going through the channels. They themselves were able to get a gun. Again, not every time, but the vast majority of the time. That's an important step to remember, because if our goal is to prevent these shootings, shouldn't our goal also include looking at how these shootings took place? Now, there was a shooting a few years ago here in Utah, and it was the Trolley Square shooting. At that shooting, we saw that it was actually not law enforcement, but an off-duty police officer, as well as an individual who was carrying a firearm with them at that location, that helped preserve lives. And they kind of got him, the shooter, the would-be assailant, got pinned down in a crossfire. That's what prevented this person from roaming freely at Trolley Square and shooting people. So it's always a good guy with a gun. We have had countless issues of this, and it's substantiated most recently at a shooting just down in Texas. Person walks into a church, opened fires on a couple individuals, killing one, and a good guy was able to immediately return fire, one shot, and the assailant was killed, and at that point, no longer able to inflict damage. So the other problem with these universal background checks is, here's a great question. How is the government going to know if I sell a gun to a friend of mine? Answer, the only way that they're going to be able to do that is if they establish a database with every single gun owner and every single weapon, which is, again, not the way that our Constitution was written, not the way that the Second Amendment is here for us. We shouldn't be asking the government, can I have that right, please? These are inalienable rights. These are rights not granted by government, but granted to us by the Almighty God. The second bill is HB 229, and this is what a lot of us consider a red flag legislation, meaning we're going to preemptively take a person's gun, no due process, no court. We're going to take their gun up to 1 year based on what? Based on an accusation, not based on an individual being, again, having that due process is now removed. So very dangerous legislation. This one is actually being introduced by Representative Handy, a Republican. So, ladies and gentlemen, click on the links below. The other task that I would really encourage you to do is make sure that you contact your legislator to oppose this legislation. If you don't know who your legislator is, I've put a link down below where you can locate your legislator. Typically, they love to listen to their constituents. At least they tell us they do. So by clicking below, you can let your representative, your senator know that you are opposed to these bills. A lot to look at. We've got some bills numbered down below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.